الإدلاء بشهاداتكم. الرجاء تعبئة الاستمارة الخاصة بالشاهد وتعطوها إلى الرقيب الموجود في مؤخرة هذه القاعة. الرجاء عدم الوصول إلى اللجنة في الطاولة المستديرة في أي وقت من الأوقات، وإذا ترغبوا بجهاز ترجمة الرجاء الذهاب إلى الطاولة المستديرة في الخارج. شكراً جزيلاً.
Bonjour, bienvenue à l'audience sur l'immigration et sur le bien-être assuré aux immigrés. Nous vous conseillons, pendant tout le moment de l'audience, de mettre votre téléphone sur silence. Si vous souhaitez témoigner, vous pouvez soumettre votre témoignage à l'adresse suivante, testimony@consil.newyorkcity.gov. Et si vous souhaitez témoigner physiquement, n'hésitez pas à vous rapprocher auprès des sergents qui sont situés dans le fond de la salle. Pendant tout le déroulement du conseil. N'hésitez pas, si vous souhaitez une traduction dans votre propre langue, à vous rapprocher du centre de traduction qui se trouve à l'entrée de la salle. Nous vous remercions encore pour votre coopération et nous vous souhaitons bonne journée. Merci.
Okay. Buenas tardes, bienvenidos al concilio de la ciudad de Nueva York. Esta es la audiencia que vamos a tener aquí acerca de inmigración y bienestar general. En este tiempo, por favor, les pedimos que apaguen sus teléfonos móviles, sus teléfonos celulares o cualquier aparato electrónico que ustedes poseen. Si ustedes tienen algún testimonio que ustedes quisieran submitir o entregarlo, lo pueden hacer por medio de su correo electrónico a la siguiente dirección de correo electrónico: testimony@council.nyc.gov. Si usted desea testificar, por favor llene un papelito y se lo entrega a uno de los sargentos que está aquí presente en la parte trasera del salón. En cualquier momento, si usted quiere hacer una testificación, no se acerque por favor a esta parte del frente, ¿okay? Si usted requiere un aparato de traducción o un aparato de interpretación, vaya a la parte del frente, ¿ok? Muchas gracias.
waa kay mbooloo mi ñu ngi leen di sant di leen gërëm ci seen teewaay fii tey nag dañuy waxtaane wàllu immigration ak lépp lu ci aaju ñu ngi leen di ñaan jamono yi nag ngeen fay wala ngeen mettre sous silence seen téléphone ak lépp loo xam ne nii wàllu électronique la. léegi nag bu fekkee da ngeen bëgg a wane seen seede mun ngeen koo envoyer par email. Email bi mu ngi nekk testimony@consil.nyc. léegi nag bu fekkee da ngeen a bëgg a seede tey fii nii it mën naa ne da ngeen di jege takk der bi moom dina leen jox këyit ngeen bind seen tur ak seen sant après bu seen tur jotee ñu woo leen. ok ñu ngi leen di ñaan tamit bu kenn jege ci table yii nii fii ñuy defee ndaje mi. léegi tamit ñu ngi leen di ñaan bu fekkee da ngeen a bëgg ci langue bi ngeen dégg écouteur pour ngeen mën a xam lu ñuy wax mun ngeen leen jege ñoom di leen jox écouteur nga xam ne lépp lu ñu fi wax rek dinañ leen ko traduire ci seen langue. waa koy jërëjëf.
on jarama ko adden ɗo hande ko weltanagol fi innugol hande ko New York City Council ɗo Meeting and Committee ko fi au General Welfare and Immigration. ɓe inni kadi fewndo o l'heure ɗo hiɓe faala téléphone ji ɗin fopp yo waɗuɗo e silence hara on kadi hara kadi on dérangeali yimɓe ɓen. so si ɗon faala témoignude noon hiɗon wawi wonde témoin ɓattago ɗon o ɗumaju sergent jo ka ɗuma ɓaawoto e kadi si ɗon faala jonde témoin ji mon ɗin hara ko yon recordu hiɗon wawi yawde ka o email inneteɗo testimony@council.nyc.gov e kadi ko ɓe ɓeydata ɗon no inne testimony@council honno nyc.gov. si ɗon faala kadi translation honno ɗon wawi kadi ɓattade sergent noon fi assistance si on wawata. e tam wo tam ɓe faalaka yon ɓato membre ɓe ɓen duga ko ɓe wattanta on ɗon kadi wo si ɗon faala nande ɗuma ƴettugol ɗumaji ni ko waɗi ɗon ko noppi mon fi on nanu ko yimɓe wolta kon fi nantinangol ɗon haray ɗon wawi yawde ka ɓaawo baafal ɗo ƴetton ɗuma device woy ko yi koye ɓaawa to waɗon ko nder noppi mum on jarama fi compréhension mum.
Thank you very much for your kind cooperation. Chairs, we're ready to begin.
Good morning, everyone. Bear with us a minute. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's hearing. My name is Diana Ayala, and I am the Deputy Speaker of the New York City Council and the Chair of the General Welfare Committee. And I will be speaking this way because we have translation services that are ongoing, and so I'm trying to be mindful and speak as slowly as possible. Today, we are holding an oversight hearing on the implementation of the administration's 30 and 60-day rules for asylum seekers in city shelters. International and domestic law recognizes an individual's right to flee persecution in their home country and seek asylum in another. Historically, New York City has been a city that welcomes new migrants, and this council has passed laws that protect migrants from unnecessary interference with their right to reside in this city and this country. Those laws continue to hold true regardless of any changes from January. In addition to these protections, the city has also always provided our New Yorkers with an array of available resources that this city has. 200,000 immigrant newcomers, with many coming to the city seeking asylum and other forms of immigration relief. Many of these new city residents began their journey residing in the city's shelter system, in DHS-run shelters and humanitarian emergency response relief centers, or HERCs, and respite centers run by other city agencies. As of October 27th of this year, the Adams administration reported that over 59,000 of these new immigrants were in the city's care. Immigration to a new country includes many obstacles, from the often harrowing and dangerous journeys to claim asylum, to the long and sometimes inefficient immigration process that indicate when new arrivals can work to care for themselves and their families. Unfortunately, policies such as the administration's 30 and 60-day shelter stays limits add unnecessary additional challenges to this arduous process. In July 2023, the Adams administration has imposed limits on shelter stay for asylum seekers and immigrant new arrivals, beginning with 60-day limits for single adults that eventually lessened to 30 days, and then 60-day limits for families staying in HERCs. We have heard from many New Yorkers about the challenges created by these shelter stay limits, including inadequate casework services provided to those subject to these federal agencies regarding their immigration cases, continued access to legal services, and significant concerns regarding continuity of education for children and families. We're here today to hear from directly impacted individuals, advocates, and the administration about the implementation of the shelter stay limits, challenges that they may have caused to individuals and families, and what the future of these policies looks like. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilmember Brewer and Aviles, and I'm sure that we'll be joined by others shortly. I also wanted to recognize that we have been joined by the AP Government students from High School of Health and Professions, and their teacher, Deborah Falmino, from Carlina Rivera's district. Thank you for coming. Thank you. And I believe that we're also being joined by John Bone High School students as well. I'm not sure if they're here, but if they are, welcome as well. At this time, I'd also like to thank my committee staff who worked to prepare this hearing: Sahar Mozami, Legislative Counsel; Nina Rosenberg, Policy Analyst; Julia Haramis, Unit Head; Parina, Rahman, Analyst, Finance Analyst. Sorry, I'm like stumbling through my words today, Ann Driscoll, data analyst, and finally my staff, Elsie Encarnacion, chief of staff. I would now like to turn it over to Chair Aviles for her opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councilmember Alexa Aviles, Chair of the Committee on Immigration. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we will be examining updates on the implementation of the 30 and 60-day shelter limit rules. I'd like to thank Deputy Speaker Ayala, Chair of the Committee on General Welfare for co-chairing this important hearing. I'd also like to thank the representatives from the administration, members of the public, and my committee colleagues who have joined us here today. I'd like to begin by reminding everyone that New York City has always been and will always be a city of immigrants. Now, more than ever, we must come together to protect our immigrant neighbors, both new arrivals and those who have called New York City home for some time. Many of us are still processing the events of the last couple of weeks, but now it is a time to act. The next 4 years, the next 4 years may be difficult, and in fact, may be very scary. But in New York City, we will work to ensure that our neighbors are free from fear and harm and are able to experience the America they've dreamt of and struggled to reach. This city has been a beacon of hope from countries around the world looking to start a new life, looking to escape suffering, looking to find opportunities. We must continue to support our immigrant communities, and with today's oversight hearing, the Committees on General Welfare and the Immigration Committee will again examine how the 30-60-day shelter limit policies are affecting our newest New Yorkers. For those individuals who are directly impacted by these policies, who wish to testify today but are uncomfortable with sharing their full name in this public setting, please feel free to write your first name only on the witness slip. As my co-chair mentioned, the 30 and 60-day shelter limits were introduced in July 2023 by the Adams administration, and since then, advocates and providers across the spectrum of fields have sounded the alarm on the consequences of these shelter stay limits and the lack of case management available to shelter residents. Providers have shared how housing instability affects the ability of new arrivals to apply for any benefits or immigration statuses. If an application for assistance or immigration relief is sent and returned, and the return address is a shelter that an applicant does not reside in anymore or has any access to, that only further complicates access to benefits that could help these individuals and families become independent from shelters. We're deeply concerned with how these policies are impacting school-aged children, forcing children to leave their residences during the school year, to possibly be placed in another shelter miles away from their school, can affect a child's mental well-being and their progress in school. Our bus system is already deeply challenged, so adding unnecessary burdens to that system as well leaves us truly scratching our heads about the true intention of this policy, which seems to result in more chaos and waste rather than stabilization. Advocates, educators, residents have shared that constantly removing children from classrooms affects everyone, especially the permanently placed students who are seeing their class members disappear over and over again. There are also concerns about how this housing instability affects local providers and communities. Establishing relationships with shelter residents is a significant component of our work that community-based organizations and local providers do for their immigrant clients, especially for new arrivals who are often fearful of interactions with city agencies. Establishing that relationship is immensely complicated. However, if an individual or family stops showing up because they've been moved to a different location, this can strain providers who put a lot of work already into initial contact with a client. While the number of new arrivals in shelters has decreased, the unintended consequences of not providing stable pathways for independence may put the city at greater risk of instability further down the line. We can work together to ensure that our immigrant newcomers are supported enough to begin establishing their lives in New York City. We also look forward to hearing testimony from the advocates and providers who support these newcomers endlessly, and from newcomers themselves, who, like many before them, millions before them, who came from other countries, very much in the no allowing for revisionist history, very much in the same way, to our beloved city to start anew. Lastly, the Committee on General Welfare will hear my bill, Resolution 41, which the New York State Working Families Tax Credit and some of New York's most vulnerable children. I'm grateful to Chair Ayala and the Committee on General Welfare for hearing this bill and focusing relentlessly on ways to improve the lives of working families of our city. And lastly, I would like to thank the committee staff for their work on this hearing, including Nicole Cata, Rebecca Barilla, Carolina Gill, Florentine Cabor, and finally my staff, Chief of Staff Edward Cerna, Legislative and Budget Director Christina Botego, Legislative Fellow Kate Byrne, and Communications Director Winnie Marian, and everyone for working in the background to make this hearing run smoothly. And with that, thank you.
Thank you. I will now turn it over to our pre-panel of impacted individuals, and a reminder that we have 5 minutes per panelist. I will now call up Kelly Gonzalez, Josio Gonzalez Ramirez, Catherine Cliff, and Mary Perez. Siéntese ahí, sí. Cada una tiene 5 minutos. One second, please. Okay, you can begin on this side. We're going to start.
Do you want me to sit down on the side? ¿Es better? Okay, pues muévete un poquitico. Vamos a mover la silla un momentico.
Good morning. My name is Catherine Cliff, and I'm testifying on behalf of the Legal Aid Society and the Coalition for the Homeless.
Okay.
Thank you to the Committee of General Welfare, Chair Ayala, the Committee on Immigration, and Chair Aviles for the opportunity to testify today. Sure. As we sit here today, we have an incoming federal administration who has made it very clear they plan to cause harm to our newest New Yorkers. The city should be focusing its resources to help new arrivals get access to the help they need to move out of shelter, instead of imposing counterproductive requirements that force new arrivals to reapply for shelter every 30 or 60 days. Case management and legal services are the answers, not forced relocations every 30 or 60 days. As you will hear today from those families and individuals directly impacted by the 30 and 60-day notices, these policies make it even harder for people to move out of shelter. Our clients often lose access to their mail once they move, including vital immigration documentation. They lose jobs when they have to miss work to reapply for shelter or risk being placed in new locations far from their places of employment. For single adults who don't meet the requirements to remain in shelter, these time limits relegate them to the streets, further delaying their progress and exposing them to more physical harm as winter approaches. School-age children, as was discussed in the introduction, are often placed further from their schools and miss weeks of school while they wait for new bus routes to be set up by the Department of Education. In addition to all of these harms, physically going to the offices where new arrivals must go to request another shelter placement may put them at risk. These sites are known to the public as locations where new arrivals will be, putting them at risk of apprehension by the incoming federal administration. While we appreciate the city's announcement yesterday that families with children in grades K through 6 in non-DHS shelters will not need to change shelters after their second 60-day notice, the policy should be that families should not have to change shelter at all, not even once. Each shelter change leads to significant disruption and negative consequences for families, especially for school-age children. The Department of Homeless Services announced a few months ago that they plan to impose 60-day notices on new arrival families with children in the DHS system. Up until now, DHS families have not been subject to these notices. We've told DHS we do not believe they have a legal basis to implement this policy in DHS shelters, and they have now agreed that they will not require these families to move at the end of the 60 days, as long as they request an extension prior to that date. However, we wait specifics of how this process will work in practice. We call on the city to end the use of the 30 and 60-day notices, provide quality case management at all shelter sites, invest in immigration legal services, and expand city FEPS in accordance with the bills already passed by this council. At a time when the incoming federal government is actively working to harm our newest New Yorkers, the city should be doing everything in its power to protect them. Thank you.
Asegúrese que la luz esté prendida. Ajá. La luz del micrófono.
Así, ¿cierto? Okay. She's going to read in Spanish and I will interpret into English. Okay, puedes comenzar.
¿Le puede poner el micrófono un poquito más cerca a ella?
Maricruz Pérez. Vivo en el Hotel Roosevelt de la 45. Okay. Buenos días, mi nombre es Maricruz Pérez. Vivo en el Hotel Roosevelt de la 45 aquí en Manhattan. Okay. Es que estoy nerviosa.
Okay. I'm a little nervous, so I apologize for my nervousness.
Le voy a explicar un poquito sobre la experiencia que he tenido, las veces que he tenido que vivir.
Deme un segundito.
Un segundo, ¿ok? My name. Oh, sorry. El hotel es en la 45, ¿cierto?
Sí, 45.
¿Y qué avenida?
La quinta.
Quinta, ok.
Quinta.
Okay. 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 My name is Maricruz Perez. I'm living in one of the hotels based in Manhattan, right? And I'm going to explain some of the matters and situations I'm going through right now. Continúa. Puedes continuar.
Les voy a explicar un poquito de lo que me ha tocado vivir, las veces que me ha tocado cambiarme de shelter. He vivido 120 días en dos shelters diferentes. Ahorita estoy en uno de 60 días. Me toca...
Un segundo. Okay, I have changed myself to multiple shelters because of my economical situation. I have lived for a period of around 120 days in 3 different shelters. ¿Dos shelters o tres? Sorry, in 3 different shelters. Okay, continúa.
Ahorita estoy en uno de 60 días. Me toca salir el día 24.
¿El 4 de noviembre?
No, 24 ahorita.
24.
He experimentado un poco de, me han tratado, o sea, he recibido un poquito de racismo, maltrato, discriminación.
Okay, un segundo. In the shelter that I'm living at the moment is a shelter where I'm supposed to be there for 60 days. And unfortunately, in this shelter, I have experienced a lot of racism, discrimination because of my national origin.
También de desinformación, porque yo tuve una cita muy importante que tenía que ir en lo de las huellas dactilares que cuando uno va a aplicar para el permiso de trabajo, y entonces me entregaron mi papel 4 días después de la cita.
Okay, un segundo. There is also a lack of information in that shelter. Something that happened to me, I was supposed to receive an immigration interview you're familiar with the immigration fingerprints. When you go to the immigration and you have to scan your hands, basically they gave me my immigration letter, but I received the letter 4 days after my fingerprints interview, and this letter was already too late.
Tuve que esperar 3 meses más para que pudiera reprogramarme la cita de nuevo. Cada vez que nos toca aplicar para otro shelter, o sea, nos dicen, tenemos que ir cada 15 días a que nos recuerden cuando nos toca salir del shelter.
Okay, un segundo. And what happened, because of this mistake they made, I had to wait 3 more months in order to get another fingerprints interview with the U.S. Department of Immigration office, and this delayed my immigration case. Also, every time I go to that shelter, I had to remind them, they had to remind me all the time, then 2 weeks I had to leave, then 2 weeks I had to leave. Continúa.
Bueno, también es porque tengo un poquito de miedo por lo que pasó con el nuevo presidente. Está un poco desesperada porque no sé qué es lo que puede pasar.
Okay, un segundo. I'm a little afraid, because what is happening right now to all of you. You know, we have a new president. It's going to start in January, President Trump. And I'm very afraid because I don't know what's going to happen with me after he takes the office in January.
Ay, no sé qué más decir. Bueno, cuando nos toca aplicar, mi hijo tiene que perder ese día de clases, tengo que perder el día de trabajo.
In high school.
High school.
Okay. When I had to go to this interview or to the shelter, sometimes my son had to lose 1 day of classes. He's studying high school here in New York, and he had to miss this day of classes because of this.
Y bueno, yo no estoy exigiendo que me den, sino yo estoy haciendo las cosas bien, quiero hacer las cosas bien. Confío en Dios de que nos puedan ayudar y quiero vivir para estar tranquila, no estar desesperada, no tener temor de nada.
Un segundo. I just want to do the right things. That's why I'm asking for all your help, because I just don't want to live in fear all the time. I don't want to live afraid of everything. I just want to live in peace, and that's why I'm asking for your help at the moment.
No, ya no voy.
Okay, this is everything what I wanted to say now.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Así. Yeah, no clapping. Just, Rocío.
Rocío habla. ¿Necesitas intérprete?
Buenos días.
Rocío necesita intérprete
Rocío,
también.
vamos a
Deja que él se mueva.
Ella se va a sentar aquí y yo me siento al lado tuyo. Discúlpame. ¿Escribiste algo? ¿Quieres leerlo?
Sí.
Lo dices
Lo voy a leer y voy a decir. Buenos días con todos.
This is Sam, right?
En estos 11 meses.
Sam? Okay, thank you. Okay, continúa del comienzo.
Buenos días con todos. En estos 11 meses que tengo ya en este país, me han trasladado 6 veces.
6 veces.
6 veces a diferentes shelters, y como también en hoteles de uso público.
Un segundo. In these 11 months, I have been living in the United States. I was transferred to different hotels and to different shelters for around 6 times already, and also the públicos.
Hoteles públicos.
And they also sent me to Pablo hotels as well.
En esos hoteles entran, bueno, todo tipo de personas. No tenemos ningún tipo de seguridad para los niños. También mis hijos perdieron más de 2 semanas por los traslados al colegio.
In these hotels, we can see any kind of people, dangerous people and people who are okay or people who are very dangerous. So we don't have safety in the hotel. Another problem is that my children lost 2 weeks of classes because we were transferring so many times from one hotel to another.
Muy aparte de eso, en el otro shelter donde estaba, bueno, es demasiado el frío que nos ponen en el aire acondicionado porque es muy frío. Mis hijos, en esos 4 meses que estuve ahí, mis hijos todo el tiempo enfermos, con enfermedad respiratoria.
Okay, un segundo. Those weeks that we're staying in that shelter, we noticed that those shelters were extremely cold. The reason why they were so cold is because the air conditioner was high temperature, and my children got very sick. They got sick with respiratory infections or similar diseases like this.
Ajá. Los baños también están muy sucios. Yo he sufrido muchas veces de infecciones urinarias por ese problema de los baños. La comida también es muy mala, los niños no la comen. Entonces tenemos...
Okay. Another problem is that the bathrooms of those shelters are very dirty. They are so dirty that I got infected with a urinary tract infection because of how dirty those bathrooms were. Also, the food in those shelters is very bad. The food is so bad that my children don't want to eat the kind of food they're serving in that shelter.
Los niños no reciben esa comida. No es que yo sea malagradecida porque...
Okay, gracias.
No es que yo sea malagradecida porque yo agradezco que nos estén dando un plato de comida y un techo. Pero eso no quiere decir que los niños pasen por eso.
Un segundo, okay? Please don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I appreciate to all of you and to the government of New York that you're giving me a plate of food and also a place for me to live. But please understand, it's very hard for me because of my children, that my children are going to eat the bad food.
Ajá. Aparte también es el gasto que nosotros hacemos, aparte que no trabajamos, tenemos que gastar en movilidades que cobran muy caro.
¿Movilidades?
Movilidad, o sea, de trasladarnos.
Okay,
Ajá, trasladarnos de un lugar a otro, porque nos vamos de un sitio hasta la 45, hasta el Hotel Roosevelt.
Okay, un segundo. It's not only the bad conditions of those shelters, and also we also spending money moving from one place to another. Let me give you an example. We moved from one shelter to another shelter located around 45th Street and Roosevelt, and this causes extra expenses for us to move.
Otra cosa de eso, aparte, es todo el estrés que tenemos, que sufrimos mucho estrés. Mi esposo le dio la enfermedad de rosácea, que fue por el estrés. Aquí, rosácea.
Yes, okay.
A mi esposo, y es una enfermedad que ya no tiene cura, porque es por el estrés. Eso es lo que le dijo el médico.
Okay. We also have very high stress in these type of shelters. Let me give you an example. My husband developed a back skin disease called rosacea, where the skin becomes very bad, and the reason was because of the high stress that he was facing in that shelter. Continúa. El doctor te dijo eso?
Sí, el doctor le dijo
the doctor told me that skin disease was caused because of stress.
Ajá. Bueno, me gustaría a mí poder tener la posibilidad de cambiar todo esto, ¿no? Que me dieran una facilidad o algo, una ayuda para poder tener una estabilidad, para que mis hijos puedan vivir mejor, una mejor alimentación para ellos.
Okay. I would like that you give me the opportunity to change all this, that I can have a better quality of life, to live in a better place, because it's very hard for me to live with this. Especially, I'm very concerned about my children. My children need help, and they don't have to follow anything.
Sí, y poder tener una tranquilidad y una comodidad sin presiones y sin preocupaciones, que es lo que nos dan en el shelter.
I want it to be calm. I don't want to have stresses or pressure because of this. I want it to be in a place in peace.
Bueno, eso es todo, porque ya no hay más que... Hay muchas cosas más que podría decir, pero en realidad me tomaría mucho tiempo y yo creo que hay otras personas que también quieren opinar.
Okay, there are other things I would like to say to you, but unfortunately I know we are limited of time, and my other mates here, they also need to say their own things. So this is the only things I can say for now, but there are other things I would like to tell you as well.
Nosotras pertenecemos al grupo de mujeres indocumentadas.
Okay, the lady here saying, we belong to a group of undocumented women who live in the United States. Okay, ¿quieres ahora? Okay, vamos a cambiarnos. ¿Tú vas a hablar en español? Sí, okay. Okay. Creo que ¿sabes prender? Está bien.
Sí, no, a mí me da...
Sí, puedes comenzar.
Buenos días para todos. Mi nombre es Kelly González.
¿Cómo te llamas?
Kelly González.
Ok, Kelly González.
Sufro un poco de
No te preocupes, tranquila.
Ok. ¿Cómo se llama? Vengo de Venezuela. Soy madre soltera de 7 niños y pertenezco al grupo de mujeres indocumentadas, Las Comadres.
¿Se llaman Las Comadres?
Las Comadres.
Las Comadres, ok. Okay, un segundo, okay?
Okay.
My name is Kelly González. I'm usually from Venezuela, South America, and I belong to a group of undocumented women. It's called Las Comadres in Spanish, right? And this is the name of our group. Continue.
Ok. Vengo a explicar, o sea, lo que me ha reflejado a mí el sistema de desalojo. Estoy de enero acá, he sido desalojada 5 veces.
¿5 veces te han desalojado?
Sí.
5 veces, ok, continúa.
Sí, 5 veces, y el cual me ha sido un poco duro por la educación de mis hijos. Porque, ¿cómo se llama? Mis hijos...
Ok, un segundo, ok. Ok, since I came to the United States... ¿7 meses llegaste?
No, en enero llegué.
Okay. Since I came from Venezuela in January, I have been living in these immigration shelters, and I have been evicted around 7 times from these shelters, and this is very bad, especially because of me and because of my children. 7 veces dijiste, ¿no?
No, 5 veces.
I'm sorry, not 7 times, 5 times, my apologies. I was evicted 5 times from the shelters. Continúa.
Okay. Entonces, han visto un poco afectado en el sistema de la educación, ya que estamos aquí nuevos y ellos se están adaptando y constantemente uno tiene que aplicar. Ese día de aplicar, tengo que ir con todos mis hijos porque no me permite el sistema ir yo sola. Todos debemos ser procesados.
Okay, un segundo. And this is a big problem for all of us because my children are new in the United States. As you know, the education in Venezuela is different, so they're getting adapted to the American school education. So what happened, we had to be processed together. So they cannot process only myself and the children individually. All of us, we had to be processed together. Continúa.
Ok, en todo ese evento, pues ellos han perdido hasta 2 semanas de clase, pues en todas las veces.
2 semanas.
Sí.
Okay.
Por lo que, ¿cómo se llama? El proceso mío es muy difícil porque la ubicación mío cuesta demasiado. No hay Chester para mí. Porque son...
¿Cuesta demasiado?
Sí, porque son muchos menores a mi cargo y ningún hotel me quiere recibir porque no van a poner un grupo de menores a dormir solo.
Segundo. This is the main problem. I have 7 children. So, you know, it's many children together. So the problem is very hard for me to go from one shelter to another with 7 children. And some of those shelters don't want to accept me because the amount of children I have 7 children. When they find out I have 7 children, they don't want to take us. Continúa.
Bueno, entonces el proceso mío es largo porque como no encuentran ubicación, entonces en esos días he durado hasta 1 semana lo que es en las camillas, esperando que me den una ubicación.
¿En las camillas?
Sí, durmiendo en las camillas.
Okay. Okay. So because of this, my situation is being so bad that even sleeping on a stretcher, you know, like the ones from the hospitals, right? And because I've been waiting for a very long time, sometimes for 1 week, 2 weeks, for my case to be processed for those shelters.
Bueno, entonces el proceso es un poco largo por la ubicación, También el Estado da un apoyo como son los transportes escolares para mis hijos. Yo no puedo ocupar ese apoyo porque no pueden disfrutar de ese beneficio por el constante cambio de Chester.
Okay, un segundo. Also, another problem that we have, the children have a benefit provided by the schools. There's the transportation and benefits like this, because they are moving us so often from one shelter to another. My children cannot take advantage of this school benefit or transportation because of this. Continúa.
Porque me dice la escuela que el sistema dura 15 días para ingresarlo y 15 días para cambiar de dirección. Sería un mes.
Un segundo. The problem is that the school need 2 weeks in order to process a change of address. So that means 2 weeks to process the change of address and 2 weeks to transfer the children from one school to another. And this is a very long process. Continúa.
Sí, entonces por eso mis hijos no pueden disfrutar ese beneficio que le dan como el transporte, que es algo importante.
And this is the reason why my 7 children cannot enjoy this benefit of school transportation because what I'm facing right now.
También he tenido problemas por lo que el sistema que si me toca llevar a uno de mis hijos tienen una cita médica, entonces no puedo llevarlo a la cita o lo llevo a la escuela o a la cita. Entonces han perdido días de clase porque si ellos tuvieran el beneficio de un sitio fijo y si ocuparan el transporte.
Un segundo, okay? Another problem is this, because they don't have a steady school transportation. What is happening is this. Let's see, they have a medical appointment and also they had to go to school. My poor children had to decide between missing a class or missing a medical appointment. It's very bad for all of us. Continúa.
Sí, me toca entonces, es duro, pero me toca llevármelo a todos para la cita y ese día pierden el día de clase. Pienso que si tuviera un sitio yo fijo donde ellos puedan optar por ese beneficio.
Un segundo, okay? So, I have a steady place for me to live, even as a steady shelter. These things will not be happening. There were situations when I need to take all the children to a medical appointment and they had to miss school days or a day of school because of this. Continúa.
Bueno, entonces eso es lo que, mi reflejo es sobre mis hijos, la educación de ellos, porque pienso que para esto vinimos a este país para darle una mejor educación a ellos.
Okay, un segundo. And this is why I'm concerned. I came from Venezuela to the United States thinking about my children. I wanted a better education for my children, the education they don't have in my home country. Continúa.
Sí. ¿Cómo se llama? ¿Cómo cambia mi vida si estaría en un sitio fijo? Porque yo podría trabajar, me iría tranquila para mi trabajo y mis hijos podrían usar el beneficio de su transporte.
Ok, un segundo. Y unable to find a steady place to live, even as a shelter, our life will change because I will be able to find a job. Also, my children will be able to enjoy this school transportation benefit. But in order to enjoy these things, we need a steady place for us to live. Continúa.
Ok, eso es todo lo que tenía que decirle. Pienso como madre que uno debe de invertir en la educación de sus hijos. Porque, sí, en la educación de sus hijos, porque es el futuro como la vejez de uno.
Un segundo, la vejez de uno.
Sí,
okay. Yeah. This is what I wanted to say to you because it's very important us as a mothers to invest in the education of our children because our children will be our support when we become old and when we get into this old age. We can count on them as an old people when we get this age. So thank you for listening to us.
Muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you very much.
Un segundo, por favor, no se me vayan.
Un segundo, te quiero decir algo.
I want to thank you for coming today. Quiero darle las gracias por venir hoy a testificar. Sé que es bien difícil. No es fácil lo que están pasando. I know that it's very difficult. The process that you're going through is not, an easy one. I have one question.
Tengo una pregunta.
Are any of you in your respective sites receiving case assistance? Do you have a social worker that you're working with?
¿Algunos están recibiendo alguna manejadora de casos o administradora de casos en esos albergues de inmigrantes? ¿Sabes qué es? Es como una persona que se encarga de tus casos.
Bueno, yo no tengo una en sí personal, en el Chester hay muchas.
Okay, honestly, I don't have my own case manager. I believe there are case managers there, but I don't have my personal case manager, no.
Okay. ¿Alguna de ustedes tiene alguna trabajadora social que está trabajando con ustedes donde lo están hospedando?
¿Tiene alguna trabajadora social? ¿Sabes qué es trabajadora social?
No. Prenda el micrófono, por favor.
No. No, she doesn't have one direct case social worker, no.
Okay.
Solamente tenemos acceso a los trabajadores sociales cuando nos toca la entrevista de los 15 días, que es para como recordarle que tenemos que salir el día que nos toca.
Okay. Can you translate?
Oh, apologize.
You can do it from there.
Del comienzo, por favor. I'm sorry.
Que solo tenemos acceso al trabajador social es cuando tenemos la entrevista cada 15
Un
días.
segundo. We only have access to the social worker when we had the interview every 2 weeks. Continúa.
Es la entrevista para recordarnos que nos toca salir el día, la fecha de salida, pues.
We had this interview mostly when they had to remind us that we had to leave the shelter by certain day. This is when we, get the interview with the social worker.
Pero una trabajadora social como tal, trabajando en el caso de nosotros así, como tal no tenemos.
No, but we don't have a personal social worker who's working in our case. We don't have one, no.
A menos que, por lo menos si tengamos alguna pregunta que hacer tenemos que estar atrás como preguntando.
¿Tienes que estar detrás preguntando?
Sí, o sea, ir y preguntar cualquier cosa.
No, we don't have a personal social worker. What we do, sometimes when we have questions, we go to the back area there of the shelter and we ask people about these, people who work at the shelter, but we don't have a personal social worker, no.
Okay. Muchísimas gracias.
Okay, dice que muchas.
Thank you.
¿Alguna pregunta o algo? ¿Alguna pregunta?
Sí.
Oh, I think she have a question.
Yo tengo permiso de trabajo, tengo social, quisiera trabajar. He tomado un curso de 2 semanas, de 8 a 5 de la tarde.
¿Qué tipo de curso?
Para la construcción.
Okay, un segundo. I already have a social security number, and I also have a work permission in order to work in the United States. I also took a course in construction. ¿Cuántas
semanas para 4 certificaciones.
Okay, and I took this construction course for 2 weeks, right, in order for me to get my certification to work as a construction worker.
Esto fue, gracias a que, los trabajadores sociales me hicieron una cita para eso. Eso es en otro shelter distinto al de ella. Okay. No todo, en mi caso, no todo es malo. En esa parte, a nosotros sí nos apoyan mucho.
Un segundo. I remember one of the social workers was not in the shelter, but in another shelter. She helped me in order for me to enroll in these courses in order to get the certification to work as a construction worker. So I'm not going to say everything is bad in the shelters. Things can be improved, but I was able to get these courses when I was in the other shelter.
Sí, y eso es lo que quería decir, que esto, por esa parte los trabajadores sociales sí están pendientes en este caso. Hay unas cosas buenas y cosas malas, ¿no?
Okay, un segundo. This is what I wanted to say. Yes, it's true that some social workers are paying attention to us, the immigrants, but there are also many bad things happening in these immigrant shelters too.
All right. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, okay?
Thank you.
Eso es todo.
Thank you.
No, yo no tengo preguntas.
Eso es todo, ¿cierto? Okay.
Thank you for your testimony. Gracias. I would now like to turn it over to our committee counsel we'll wait for the administration to get here so that we can swear members of the administration. While we wait, I would like to recognize that we've been joined by council members Boucher, Joseph, Banks, and Ung and Caban on Zoom. I would now like to turn it over to our committee counsel to swear in members of the administration. Oh, give me 1 second, because I also just want to put in a quick reminder. I want to remind members of the public that this is a government proceeding and that the quorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. Go ahead.
Will you please raise your right hand? Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Good morning. Before I begin, I just want to thank the panel that went before us for their bravery in coming forward. We take all concerns incredibly seriously. Racism and discrimination is not tolerated in our shelters, and we are happy, and we have staff here to follow up with the individuals after the hearing to address some of their concerns. But good morning, Chair Aviles, Chair Ayala, and members of the General Welfare and Immigration Committees. My name is Molly Schaefer, Director of the New York City Mayor's Office of Asylum Seeker Operations. I am before you today to discuss...
Quiet in the chambers.
Trumpian policy is not.
Guards, you can remove. Guards, you can feel free to remove them. Feel free to remove them. Guards, you can remove them. You can remove them. You can remove them. I just want to remind folks again that we need to be respectful. We only have until 1 o'clock with the administration. We would like to get through a list of questions that I'm sure that all of us in the room are interested in hearing the responses to. So if there's anyone else that plans to disrupt, if you can do it now so that we can get you out of the way, I would greatly appreciate it. Okay, go ahead, Molly.
All right, so name is Molly Schaefer. I'm Director of the Mayor's Office of Asylum Seeker Operations. I'm before you today to discuss the city's ongoing efforts to support migrants and asylum seekers who have and continue to arrive in New York City. I'm also joined by key agency partners, Dr. Ted Long from New York City Health and Hospitals, Chief of Operations Iris Rodriguez of New York City Department of Homeless Services, Executive Director Rudy S. Giuliani of New York City Housing Recovery Operations, and Senior Advisor Emily Ashton with New York City Emergency Management. In the interest of time, I would like to summarize my submitted testimony and move quickly to answering your questions. New York City is proudly a city of immigrants. Since April 2022, we have seen an unprecedented influx of over 223,000 new arrivals, and we've had to use every tool in our toolbox to meet this moment. We have focused on helping each person who comes through our system to achieve their goal and take their next steps for their lives in the United States. This includes exiting shelter, which has been bolstered by intensive case management paired with shelter time limits. We are focused on the barriers to exit, including language access, legal assistance, housing, access to work, and childcare. I'm also proud of the partnerships with the state and other local municipalities to help identify resettlement programs around the state as well as around the country. I would also like to take a moment to share information regarding 2 operational changes we'll be making in the coming months that we announced yesterday. We've heard from this body, advocates, and the people in our care about problems missing important mail due to movements throughout the system. We will be opening a central mailroom to serve all of our non-DHS clients. We will work with you to help spread the word to clients to ensure they pick up their mail. Additionally, in the event families with children enrolled in kindergarten through 6th grade request a second 60-day notice, they can stay in the same shelter they were previously assigned to if they still need more time in the system, making it easier for those children to continue attending their same schools and saving the city hundreds of thousands spent on busing those students to those schools. With that, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Whew, what a morning. We've been joined by Councilmember Krishnan. He was a little late, but it's okay. It's like the principal. The principal's here, guys, see? Be on time. So good morning, and thank you for being here. I'm sorry I have a little scratchy voice, so I'm chewing on something. But could you, I guess my first question is, regarding the 30-day limit, is if you could tell us how many 30-day time limit notices has DHS issued in 2024 as compared to, because I know so we're working with 2 different systems. What does that look like on the HERC end, and what does that look like on the DHS side?
Yes, if you give me 1 second, I can get the exact data.
Absolutely.
DHS has not started giving 60-day notices in their system at this time, but if you give me 1 minute to get the data. If we can come back to that while I try to find the data.
Do you, maybe DHS can respond to this, is there a pause on the 30-day limit at DHS, or is this supposed, are you planning to implement it at which point?
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning.
So currently we're working with our Advocates Legal Aid on how we are planning to implement the 60-day notice for our families with children. At present time, we have not started.
Okay, so it may not be for some time yet.
We are currently working with the administration and do not have a definitive date as of yet.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I got the data. So DHS is still doing 30-day notices, so I want to make that clear. That has not paused. So in FY 2024, 15,750 30-day notices were issued at non-DHS sites, and 6,015 30-day notices have been issued at non-DHS sites in FY 2025, and in DHS, 1,513 30-day notices were issued at DHS sites in FY 2024, and 1,056 30-day notices have been issued at DHS sites in FY 2025.
All right, wait, so that's the 30-day at DHS?
Yes.
So what hasn't been implemented is the 60, oh, it's the families?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so this is for singles. Gotcha, I wanted to clarify, okay.
The administration noted that clients that received the 30 and 60-day notices would receive enhanced casework to prepare for possible departure from the city's care. Can you run through the services provided? I think as you heard in the testimony, there was some discrepancy between sites. So some folks were only hearing from the caseworker 15 days prior to the expiration of their time at that specific site, where some others felt like maybe they had a little bit more interaction regarding other things like workforce development and things, similar to that. But that was kind of what the sense that I got from that panel. Could you explain a little bit about the process?
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ted Long, but one thing I just want to say is that we've worked really hard over the last year to make our case management process better and to hear from folks and really try to enhance the services we're given, including more legal connections, including more workforce connections. But let me pass it over to Dr. Long.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I also just want to say with the speakers that came ahead of us here, I really appreciate hearing their points of view as well. I think it's really important as we talk about casework, and I put my primary care hat on here as I think about how we engage people and how we listen to people, to just zoom out for a second and going beyond the numbers. We had individuals sitting in front of us a few minutes ago. I'm the primary care doctor for new arrivals, for asylum seekers, and I run sites for our new arrivals, our humanitarian centers for our new arrivals as well. I spend a lot of time with them, and I really want to make the point that casework starts with hearing everybody's individual story. And to use your words, Deputy Speaker, people have not only had a harrowing journey here, but the way that we start to talk to people, I think it's important to remember, people have been through literal hell to get here to New York City. I've heard stories of family members that have seen their partners next to them shot in the head and killed on the way here. I've heard from a mother that really stuck with me that would move heaven and earth because she had undergone female genital mutilation to protect the small daughter she was carrying with her when she came to the New York City Arrival Center, which has been named our little Ellis Island by our new arrivals. That's where case management starts, and that's what we've done since we opened the Arrival Center. We start by asking, what are some of your initial goals? Do you need immediate legal help, for example? And you heard that reflected through the panel as well. We've made some changes immediately. Now we offer to help you submit your work authorization from the Arrival Center within 24 hours of when you arrive. We weren't doing that on day one of the crisis, but we're doing it now because we've heard that's what people need, and that's what we're meeting people where they are. The way case management's really evolved is we've heard these stories, we've seen what people's needs are, and I think that it was laid out very nicely earlier. One thing you took away is everybody wants to work. So that's been a big focus of our case management efforts. I'm proud to say that one of the numbers that shows I think we're doing a good job now is that more than 70% of all eligible adults in our system have either applied for work authorization with our help or actually have work authorization and are, as the second speaker was saying, going through things like OSHA training that our case managers are connecting them to. So what our case managers are doing day to day is, one, seeing what legal help you need and plugging you into exactly the right place based on where you are in your legal journey, if you will. Two, talking to you about housing, and I have a picture on my phone sent to me a couple days ago now from a family that we were able to work with them to find housing. They resettled. It's a family of 4 that sent a picture to our team with them with I think it was a thumbs up outside of their new home, their first home in the United States of America. That's them starting to achieve the American dream. We help them to do that. And then other things case management can include, for example, was mentioned earlier, the stress that people are experiencing, especially after they've made the harrowing journey, again, in your words. So we have behavioral health that we combine with case management. We also make referrals to New York City Health and Hospitals, where we provide the bulk of outpatient behavioral health and inpatient behavioral health for New York City. So we create pathways for people based on what their individual needs are. And we help people to have different trainings, learning to speak English, things like that. The totality of that, of everything we do, which again is really driven not by what we thought people needed, but hearing from people what they need and hearing from everybody in this room. And I especially want to thank, I know we're joined by Coalition for Homeless, Legal Aid Society. We formed a community advisory board. We meet every other week. We listen. And at this point, I would really consider our success a community-driven effort. And the result of that is that today, through all the case management that we're doing, each week now, 42% more families with children are taking the next step forward and leaving our shelter system than a year ago.
Just to clarify, Dr. Long, do we know how many of the 70% of folks that have applied for workforce authorization, do you know how many of them have received that authorization?
We don't get that feedback back from the federal government, so everything that we have is self-reported, and so people have to affirmatively tell us in that case. And so we don't necessarily have that information.
And it's a good question, actually, just to further make the point that we are working with the information we have, and we're doing a good, best job we can listening. So we actually ask in our every other week, that was another good, true statement that was made, where you are, again, in your work authorization journey, if you've received work authorization, if you have the paperwork, because then our case manager won't talk to you about applying for work authorization, but once you have it, that's where we talk about the OSHA trainings that were mentioned, learning English as a second language, trying to find you jobs, which we've been helping people to do. We're even doing trainings with other community-based organizations for things like learning to work in kitchens, things like that.
Now going back to the original question, because I think I don't think that I heard an actual response to that, and I get it. Like, we're trying to do the best that we can, but part of me listening, and also part of being part of the impacted community, oftentimes I realize that there's a disconnect in the way that we in government perceive things are going, and the way that the actual people that are receiving the services perceive that those services are actually going, and oftentimes the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And so I'm concerned about how you all are able to evaluate the efficacy of the case management that is being provided from site to site, acknowledging that there are many sites, right? So it's difficult to be in all places at all times, but how do we, ensure that, in the maybe 5 or 10 that are not functioning the way that you're intending them to function, who's gauging that, who's evaluating that, and who's taking corrective action?
Yeah, I can start there, because we think a lot about that. And I think one of the things that we've done is we've sought to find the best case management organizations out there. So if you rewind, a year ago now, we had our existing vendors that were providing other services that began to provide case management. Today, at all of my sites, except for one of the sites that's transitioning, we have Cherokee Nation providing case management. There are 38 sites overall. They led the resettlement effort for the country for the Afghani people, 85,000 Afghani people, about 5 years ago. And I remember one of their tribal elders pulled me aside as we were beginning to work with them and making plans with them, and said nobody cares about resettlement more than the Cherokee people. And what we've done is we've taken, for example, them as an organization, and we've taken away the other case managers that were providing services on site and put them in place instead, because we believe that they are passionate, want to do the best job. And that's where our community advisory board, for example, informs the efforts that they do day to day. But to agree with you, I'm happy to say there are 38 sites today, but that also means that they were not at 38 sites at all times. So we've moved as fast as we can to get them into our sites. The good news is that we've overall completed 700,000 case management meetings, and we're starting to see things like the majority of people either having applied for work authorization or received it. But it is true that throughout this crisis now response, we've been trying our best to bring the right people to do the case management work online. And for example, I have the number of languages that they speak, things like that, but that wasn't all true on day one.
But how do you make sure that they're doing a good job? I mean, listen, I have wonderful staff. I love my staff. They do case management. I did case management. It's not easy. But I find that sometimes, that staff that I love is more knowledgeable in some things than they are in others. And, and so it is my responsibility to then, figure out where those, those soft spots are, and how do I, offer the support that they need, right, to advance in their knowledge so that they're better able to help the community. And so I do that weekly, right? I'm like, all right, can you give me a couple of examples of, clients that are coming into the office, people that are looking for help, what type of help, and oftentimes I find, well, somebody came for this and I wasn't sure. And I'm like, okay, well, this is where, you would get that information, but it also gives me a sense of who knows what and who doesn't, and how efficient our office is, able to operate. Who's doing that on your end?
Yeah, so I think when you're, I'll be more concrete with the data. When you're evaluating something, one of the things you first look at are process measures. So processes like, did they actually meet with people? Today, 99% of the people in our non-DHS system have had at least one meeting with their case manager. And again, that's been an improvement that we've looked at over time. Then you look at outcomes. So if a goal for people, as the speaker said earlier, are to work, well, are they applying for work authorization? Are they getting it? So we're measuring that. Are they getting trainings that they would want? So we're looking at that. And then I think before you get to downstream outcomes, like are people actually getting the apartment that we received the photo of? Because that's ultimately the goal, is to help everybody achieve the American dream. I think it's listening to people too, and that's why we have our community advisory board that has 20, 30 community-based organizations on it. We meet every other week. They're the ones that have their ears to the ground, hear everything from all of the people at our sites, and they give us all that feedback, but not in a way that's critical or anything. I would say it's more of a, we're on the same team. Let's put the facts on the table about what people are experiencing and their perception of the services that we're offering. Let's fix them together. Then ultimately, I'm not going to say we're there yet, but I think as we get more pictures of people in front of their new home, or as we look at the increase in the percentage of people, families with kids in particular, that are able to celebrate their birthday in their home as opposed to our shelter system, that's a really important part of success.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes.
Dr. Long, thank you so much. You have seen much of the trauma that people are coming with on a daily basis, and I do believe you spent an enormous amount of time with people. Do you think eviction after 30 days or eviction after 60 days is a sound policy, a trauma-informed policy, and the right thing the city should have employed?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So so just acknowledge the first thing that you said. I mean, we really have spent a lot of time with people, and by hearing them, I have all of these stories in my head that I've been told, or that of those that my team has spoken with. So people have experienced intense trauma to get here, and trauma is not just medical.
Dr. Long, I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you really quickly. As a doctor, having seen the trauma, do you think evicting someone from a shelter after 60 days is an appropriate trauma-informed policy?
Well, I'll tell you what I do think. I do think it's important, and again, this is not just my perception as a doctor, but what I've been told by people that I've cared for, is that people need help right away. So there is an issue of timing. You heard this from some of the panelists too. Everybody wants to work, and people want to work as soon as they can. So I do think it's important from a timing perspective that we offer help to people, ideally as soon as they arrive, and that's why we've started to submit applications for people from the arrival center. Molly has been the closest to...
There's no disagreement that the system that has been set up certainly to receive people and respond immediately to their arrival is an important one. I think what you're not answering, and I understand why you're not answering it, is that eviction after 60 days is not a trauma-informed policy. Fundamentally, it is not. And I think we just need to agree to the reality of that and acknowledge that the system we are trying to set up a system, but it's important for human dignity to acknowledge that this policy does not meet a trauma-informed policy, though we are trying our best. So I think I'll leave it there and I'll pass it back to
Thank you.
Council Member.
So in September, the administration announced that they would be expanding the 60-day rule to DHS shelters and send families pre-notices. Obviously, that sent people into a panic. Yesterday, we heard that there was a shift in policy, well, sort of, right, that would allow folks to stay in place after the second 60-day notice, right? I'm not sure if that replaces the September announcement.
No, so the announcement yesterday was specifically for the non-DHS 60-day notices, and it was to help make sure that we're keeping families with kids who have kids in kindergarten through 6th grade and make it easier for them to keep their kid in the same school. That does not take over the September announcement for DHS, which, as Iris mentioned before, has not rolled out yet. Yeah.
They're still working out.
Yeah.
Okay, I get that. So I won't even ask if you're still planning to expand, because I'm assuming that the answer is yes until determined otherwise. If you don't have a, well, actually, let me just move on.
how are you evaluating the efficacy of asylum seeker shelter time limits? Like, what's been the benefit of that? I mean, I agree with my colleague. And I get it. It's a very difficult position for everyone involved. We have the highest number of individuals that are unhoused in New York City. Add to that, as many migrant families that unfortunately have, exhausted sometimes every other possibility and end up in shelter. That it concerns me that we have a policy that would impose further stress. I think you have to experience homelessness to understand the level of fear and just not belonging anywhere, right? Not having that level of stability. And when you're alone, at least you're alone. But when you have children that you're responsible for, I mean, these are things that keep you up at night. So I'm not going to debate whether or not the policy is a good one or not. I believe it sucks. I think our colleagues all concur. I think many of you would feel the same way, but I understand that these are, things that the administration has felt would help expedite and encourage folks to start looking elsewhere. But how do you determine the efficacy of this policy?
Thank you for the question. I want to just first zoom in on the numbers a little bit. I think you said a lot of this, but I just want to put those. So we've had almost 224,000 asylum seekers come through the city since this response started. We currently have about 57,400 asylum seekers in our shelter system. Before we had these policies in place, and I really want to talk about these policies paired with case management because you can't have one without the other. We announced them both at the same time. We rolled them out both at the same time. They're paired because we really wanted to make sure that we were helping people through this process and that we were giving them support as they went through this. But before this policy was enacted, our numbers every week just kept going up and up and up. And that was difficult from a space perspective. We couldn't open sites fast enough to deal with the more than sometimes 4,000 people that came a week. We couldn't get staffing. We couldn't get nonprofits. We couldn't even get the big conglomerates to give us staff to be able to open sites fast enough. And so this really was intended to make sure we support people in their most vulnerable time when they first come with us, give them the support through case management, and really protect our shelter system, which has, again, grown more than 3 times in the last 2 years. When we talk about the efficacy of these programs, we really think about how many people have applied for work, how many people are in our shelter system at any one point, how many people have been connected to resettlement programs, how many people have been connected to training. It's sort of all in the same, Dr. Ted Long really talked about the different types of outcomes we're looking at, both process and then eventually these types of downstream outcomes. And so that's what we're really looking at. And I think, when we were at the peak of this response, we had 69,000 people every day, 69,000 asylum seekers or migrants that we were sheltering at any one point. We now have 57,400, which has allowed us to do things like close Randall's. Randall's is such a image of this response, and to be able to close it and to be able to really think about giving temporary shelter in smaller sites that are more throughout the city is a really big outcome for us.
Yeah, but one of the unintended consequences of the policy, however, was that we started to see more and more unhoused individuals out on the street, erecting tents, sleeping in our public playgrounds, or public parks, and faith-based, organizations. But so, how do you, how can we feel like this policy has been as successful as we intended it to be? I say we, the administration, when we have, X number of people, which I'm not sure if that's actually one of my questions regarding the homeless outreach unit, if they're keeping, tabs on how many individuals would fall into that category, because this is kind of like a gray area, right? Because they don't fall within the HERC
if they're technically outside, then they're not part of the HERC system anymore. Then it would become a street homeless issue, which then falls under the purview of DHS. So are we keeping tabs on that, and are you guys cross-referencing so that you have a better idea of how efficient this policy is, if in fact it is, leading to folks now sleeping in public spaces?
I'll hand it over to Iris, but just one thing I want to make sure is known is, 70% of the people who have come through our system have left. Before we had this policy, there was still a percentage of people that were leaving on their own, and families with children, when they come back and ask for another 60-day extension, they get it. And so, I'll turn it over to Iris to talk about the unsheltered homelessness, but I just kind of want to make those points a little bit.
No, listen, I get it, and I've always, I try to be very fair, and I look at both sides of the issue because I don't even want to know what it's like to be on that side of the table. And I know that it's been grueling for many of you who I know and have had the pleasure of working with. So this is not on my part, it would never be like a character assassination, but the truth is, right, we're working with facts, is that one of the unintended consequences of the policy is that, folks, many of them single adults, ended up, erecting tents on Randalls. This for months I've had a group of at least 10, 12 men sleeping at Thomas Jefferson Park. It wasn't until last Friday that I stopped seeing them, and all of last week, every time that I would drive by on my way downtown, there were police officers talking to them, and I'm hoping they were encouraging them to go into shelter because it was cold. One day it was raining. I reported, that they were there because I was hoping that the street outreach unit would go there, and I also want to just, say that I do understand that many of them didn't really understand what the policy was, that they could go back into the the intake center and be reprocessed, but there was in fact an overflow, right? And so because they fell out of the HERC system and now ended up in the HS, I just wonder what the number is, if it's as significant as we may assume that it is, if it isn't, and if in fact you guys are kind of touching base so that you're saying, okay, look, we were able to get 10,000 5,000 people to leave the shelter last week, but 1,000 of them ended up on our streets. How do we fix that, right? And I'm just inflating numbers here. I'm just making numbers up. But what does that look like?
So our street outreach, you're very familiar. They do go out through the city and do outreach, and we do work with the communities when they tell us there's a group of folks. One of the things that the team has been doing is, and we have not encountered a high volume of single adults in the street that are coming, new arrivals in the city. I do want to put it out there, and we have not encountered, luckily, any families with children. As Molly has said, every family with children that needs a second placement is granted a second placement or third, so forth. For those, we are working closely, and we do refer them to the reticketing center where they get processed, and my colleague here, Emily, could get you numbers if that's what's needed. But in terms of the street outreach that DHS has, when we go out, we have not encountered a significant increase of new arrivals in the city out in the street.
Any calls regarding possible sightings? Or I know at Randall's we had, over 100 folks that were living outside of the HERC in tents.
So, I could get back to you in terms of the
that
call.
should fall under the category of street homelessness, right?
I will definitely have to get back to you and let you know where we've been receiving calls and what areas we've been canvassing.
Okay. All right. I don't know how significant it is or not, but I know that it is happening, and so that we need to address if it's a matter of people not knowing what their rights are, right? Are we putting up a Bill of Rights at these sites? Are these the case managers communicating efficiently with folks and letting them know that there is a reticketing process, and if they don't have anywhere else to go, that they are welcome to go in and reapply? If folks are, sleeping in tents because they feel like, they'd rather be in a community that speaks the same language, then that's something that we should be keeping tabs on. Okay, I'll move on. For clients who received the 30-day shelter notices and requested an extension, how many extensions did DHS issue
So when we discharge our clients, we refer them to the reticketing center, and our city agency colleague here from NISM has those numbers.
So when they come to you, when they come to DHS, they go through, ideally through PATH or through 30, or through Bellevue.
Our singles?
Yes, for DHS.
So when they are with us, they're referred through us.
Through the reticketing site?
There's two ways. They come through the reticketing center or they come through the arrival center.
Ah, okay. All right. I wasn't sure. I was just.
That's the process.
Okay. So there is, so when they get to the reticketing center, they're not necessarily, if they came out of a DHS shelter and went to the reticketing, are you sending them back to a DHS site or are you sending them to a HERC?
That's a really good point. We actually, at the reticketing center, we do not make a differentiation of where they are coming from. So we will place them in the most appropriate setting that they need. And so if they came from DHS, they might be placed into a HERC site. And if they came from a HERC, they might be placed into a DHS site. It depends on the daily availability of cots.
Okay. So it's solely based on the availability of beds?
Correct.
Okay. All right. That's important. Same question for you, Molly?
I mean, Emily answered the question. I think we make determinations based on if someone has a reasonable accommodation that was granted, where the availability of cot is.
No, the question is how many 30-day time limit notices were issued in fiscal year 24?
Ah, okay. So that.
And how many so far in 25?
In 25, there was 6,015 30-day notices issued at non-DHS sites in FY 2025. There was 15,750 30-day notices issued at non-DHS sites in FY 2024. There was 1,513 30-day notices issued at DHS sites in FY 2024, and there was 1,056 30-day notices issued at DHS sites in FY 2025.
Okay. Okay. It seems like it's significantly lower at the DHS end than it is on the HERC end. Is that because you have more singles than?
Yes, so the majority of the singles beds at this time are in the non-DHS system. The DHS system has the majority of the families with children, which is still the majority of the people in our care.
Okay, and I have two questions and then I'm gonna pass it over because I know that we don't have a lot of time with you guys today, but how many 60-day time limit notices were issued at the HERCs in 2024?
So there was 944 60-day notices issued to young adults, so 18 to 22-year-olds at non-DHS sites in FY 2025, 2,348 60-day notices issued to young adults at non-DHS sites in FY 2024. There was 6,295 60-day notices issued to family with children households at non-DHS sites in FY 2025, and 17,117 60-day notices issued to family with children households at non-DHS sites in FY 2024.
And I know that this is where the social services kind of got funky because 18 to 22, right, they're legally adults, but believe me, I have a few and they're nowhere near adulting. And so is there any relationship between the HERCs and maybe DYCD, ACS, all of the other youth programs so that we're ensuring that those that are not as mature or need, guidance and further assistance are receiving that?
Absolutely. It is something we are hyper-focused on. We've spent a lot of time with DOE to make sure that kids that are eligible, the 18 to 20-year-olds that are eligible, can get schooling that way, and we've helped people apply. We've been working with DYCD on their programming as well. It's something that we're critically focused on, is this population.
May I add just one quick comment there? I think it is an important point. So for our 18 to 22-year-olds in particular, this is an issue that was, again, flagged by our community partners as something important and something we could potentially develop an individualized strategy around. So one of the things that we've done in lockstep and with our community partners is taken one of our sites and taken a couple of the floors at that site and dedicated to just people 18 to 22. I think we may actually have a couple of people 18 to 24 now, but anyways. And what we do there is we've created individualized programming that's programming we developed with DYCD, with our community partners, and with working with the people that we're caring for. That includes things like having DOE on site, things like that, but we're continuing to build out that program now. I think that the most important point I want to make there, though, is that this is an idea that was brought to us by our community partners, and their input has been critical and crucial in the difference we've made in people's lives.
Will you be able to send us the numbers of extensions and stuff like that so that we have it on record? Thank you. You're the best. But you have to say yes on the record, sorry.
Whatever the question is, yes on the record.
Okay. And then finally, regarding the client, so for clients that receive a 60-day shelter notice and requested an extension, do we know how many extensions were issued for residents in HERCs in fiscal year 25 and how many so far in 24, and so how many so far in 24? Yes.
So specifically for the 30-day notices?
Well, I guess there's also a difference, right, between how many were requested and how many were actually approved. Are they automatically approved?
So for 60-day notices, they are automatically approved.
Okay.
So for families with children.
Okay.
Has that always been the case? Yes, for 60-day notices for families with children, yes. Because we've heard that not to be the case. We've heard people getting rejected. If there's a specific question, yeah, because with families with children, it's always been that you go back to the arrival center and you get a new placement. There's never been a change in that policy.
Okay. Do we know how many extensions were requested?
Yeah, well, for families with children, that was the numbers I read a little bit earlier. So there was, in FY 2024, there was 17,117 60-day notices issued to families with children. Actually, sorry, no, I don't know how many people were extended past that first one. We'd have to get back to you, because that's just how many notices were issued.
Okay. All right, yeah, I would appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague.
So for the record, we're going to be looking at the number of both 30 and 60-day notices. Where there was requests for extensions, and then how many of those extensions were approved or denied. And we'd like to recognize John Bone High School. Thank you for joining us. Hi. Thank you so much for being here. So in terms of, I'm sorry if I missed this earlier, but I just wanted to make sure to understand this properly. So why does the 60-day notice change announced yesterday only apply to families with school-aged children?
So that's the population that most can request and get busing for the most part, and so that really does help with the busing issue. Everybody can receive a Metro card, and families can say no to busing, but that's the population that really is focused on busing.
So for those families with children in grades 7 to 12, they're just exempt from
this policy announcement. I will say that it is always our intention to keep people in the borough of their kids' school, and so we'll continue trying to do that work, but when we have to prioritize, we prioritize K through 6.
And so does this change apply to families with children in the LIFE program, Head Start, Pre-K, 3K, Promise NYC?
It does not. Only the ones that have kids that are in K through 6.
And why weren't these programs included?
We took a look at a lot of different factors, but this was the change that we decided to make.
Are there costs involved? Well, can you tell us some of the factors that were part of that decision-making process?
I'd have to defer to OMB on specific cost numbers, but...
Well, I don't know if it was one of the factors. I just kind of threw it out there.
It was one of the factors, but again, I'd have to defer to OMB on any cost factor.
Do you have any other factors that you were considering when you exempted these families?
Again, a big part of this was busing, and currently the amount of inflow into the city is a little bit lower, as everybody knows. And so we have a bigger percentage of people in care who are longer stayers, or people we're starting to consider as longer stayers. So we wanted to take some of the attention away from shelter movement and a little bit more on what things we can do to reinvest money into helping people that are longer stayers.
And does this change only apply to non-DHS sites?
Correct, because DHS has not rolled out their 60-day policy yet.
Okay. In terms of, let's see, I think I'll ask a few questions and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues who I know are eager to ask questions as well. How much, okay, I think I'll jump into costs very quickly. So how much savings has DHS generated from issuing 30-day time limit notices to asylum seekers, single adults, and adult families in shelter?
I currently do not have that number. We will probably have to get back to you.
Okay, thank you. And if you would get back to us around how much does the city expect to save from issuing 60-day time limits in DHS shelters as well? And when we might expect to see that and where we'd like to, well, where we can expect to see those savings. New York City's Independent Budget Office estimated negative consequences of this policy, including economic impact of missed work authorizations, healthcare impacts, street homelessness, busing costs, all of which we heard in the pre-panel, actually each and every one of those. Has the city factored in these costs both in the short and long term when looking at this policy?
As I mentioned when I started, I mean, none of these policies were done easily. These were done to really make sure that we were protecting both our shelter system and people at their most vulnerable time. We made a change yesterday, as we announced, to really help with some of those busing costs. And we also made a change around mail to make sure that we're continuing to do improvements in mail so people don't lose mail. One of the key things that we changed earlier this year as well was making sure that each shelter held on to any important federal mail. So at that point, anyone who had gone to a different shelter could have gone back to their shelter to pick up that mail. And so we continue to make these changes as we hear, as we get input from community members, as we get input from the people in our care, and as we continue to be in different phases of this response.
So you've mentioned busing a number of times. What is the cost savings that you're calculated in making this policy change?
So it's thousands of dollars. I don't have the exact figure, but we can get back to you.
It's a little disappointing you don't have those numbers. It sounds like a very big reason behind the policy shift. In terms of the mail, let's jump to that really quickly. How has, I mean, this has been an ongoing issue. I feel like we've been talking about this for a year. And so I'm glad to maybe finally see some movement, but very kind of lacking on details. How has the city, DHS, H&H resolved some of these delays with access to mail for households who have previously resided at DHS sanctuary sites and HERCs, who have been transferred and or exiting sites?
So we've made numerous policy changes over the past year to really focus on mail. As I mentioned, one of the big ones was when we said all sites had to indefinitely hold important mail so that anybody who left a site could come back and pick it up. We've done a pilot now of calling back people where we've had mail for a long period of time, so we're calling certain people. Even, I think, 9 months ago, I went to Randall's and specifically spent some time at the mailroom and seeing that, and then I went last month and seeing the changes and how they're prioritizing mail and how they have dedicated staff focused on it is big changes on all of our sites. Every time we've heard, there's been issues we've heard where a security guard wouldn't let a guest who was no longer in the site come in. We've fixed those issues as we've heard them. And this is sort of the culmination of that, which is now we are going to be launching in the next couple of weeks a centralized mail room where all mail will go. So I think we've tried numerous amounts of improvements to make it easier for guests to get their mail, and we continue to see the success of that, even just with what Dr. Ted said, where 70% of eligible guests have gotten their work or have applied or gotten their work authorizations, which many times is 6 months after they've applied for asylum. So they've already gotten whatever paperwork they need to be able to then apply for their EADs. So I think this is we're starting to see some of the fruits of all of this work.
And how does staff know what mail is important or not? How are they making that distinction?
So we've done a lot of trainings on this, and that was also part of our improvements, is showing people what kind of mail to look out for. So we've also included things like Medicaid cards, and important mail isn't just federal paperwork. It's driver's licenses, it's Medicaid cards. We have pamphlets to show staff. We've done trainings. We've really, again, tried to focus on letting shelter staff know.
Is staff disposing of any mail at all?
Not at this time. I think when we have, one of the things is when we have the centralized mail room, we will be having a retention policy.
Well, it is a federal crime to get rid of mail.
Yes, so it's with our lawyers as well. Obviously, we have very good lawyers that we're in constant communication with.
Very concerned. What times will people be able to walk us through how you envision this centralized system actually operating?
So it'll be a place where everyone can go to pick up their mail. So, we have lots of different things we're working through on the policy end in terms of staffing. So when we have exact hours, we'll let you know. But it'll be a place where people can come, pick up their mail, and leave. And we'll be able to have the functionality to call people who have left their mail for a long time.
And will people be required to show identification to get their mail?
I have to get back to you.
Will the center be signing for mail?
I have to get back to you on signing for mail.
Okay. Will the city be helping folks get access to the mail, like transportation to one centralized location if folks are coming from the Bronx or Queens?
So that's still under discussion, but when we have that, we will let you know.
Will the center, I'm just going to offer these questions, and obviously you're thinking about it operationally. We are very keen on understanding how this is going to work. Will the mail center have a cap on the number of folks will they be using this center as their actual mailing address?
Yes.
Okay. Will there be a cap, if that is in fact the case, on how many people can use this one center as the address? Okay. And how many people is the administration preparing to serve at this center?
We have to get back to you on those numbers. I'll get back to you on those numbers.
And has the city coordinated with the state regarding this mail center?
We've had conversations, yes.
Okay. And in terms of will the staff at the mail center be trained in data privacy laws of the city?
Absolutely, as all of our staff are. And I will also say that we've had a centralized mailroom for a certain subset of our shelters to date. NYSEM ran a centralized mailroom for specifically the folks in their care. So this is not something that we have not done before, and so we're going to continue being able to do that just at a bigger scale.
I mean, we still get text messages and emails of people trying to chase their mail. So can you walk me through Well, actually, I'm conflating two questions. I'm making a statement. There's still a lot of problems with the mail. It's very well documented. It comes up on a daily basis. Can you talk to me about the training that you have engaged your staff across all systems on data privacy?
Well, my office is the holder of the data system, and so we have our general counsel is obviously very focused on data privacy and ensuring that whatever we give to anybody, we have appropriate protections on. We also have a data privacy officer in my office to make sure that whatever we're giving, and then given what's going on, we've been doing a lot of scenario planning around data privacy and what kinds of protections we have and need as we continue.
And how are you training? How many staff do you need to train on these issues?
So our staff is, we only have 28, but we have very few people who have access to the data system. And we keep that very tight, and that's intentional. And it's only people who truly understand the data privacy posture of the city and the data privacy specific to immigration data, which obviously is a higher level of concern. We have training for contractors and shelter staff on both sanctuary city laws and data protection, and we're very conscientious about what kind of data people have access to, and there's lots of protections on if you are a shelter staff, you only get to see X amount of X part of the data system versus others, so that's something that we take really intensely when we think about it, but I'm happy to, if any of my colleagues have anything particular to their shelter system.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from DHS and the other agencies around who they're training, how they're training, and what that training looks like.
So in terms of data, as Malia says, most of the data is managed by the city. In terms of our regular poster and data, we do have also data privacy staff, and our IT and legal constantly in communication. Privacy is very important for our clients as a whole, not only for new arrivals, and we work very closely with the administration to ensure that privacy is given to our clients, not only for data, but also in terms of their status in immigration as a whole.
So how often are you training staff around the importance of data privacy?
So we would have to get
and
back
what the current laws look like.
There is often training as a system, as particularly for us as city employees in terms of cyber and IT and data sharing and confidentiality and privacy. So that's always ongoing for us as an agency.
Got it. Would you like to respond to the question?
Sure. As Iris mentioned, NISM trains not only NISM staff, but also our vendors and contractors, and they've all signed confidentiality agreements. We do, on an annual basis, require refresher trainings and update those in conjunction with council and our data privacy officer on a regular basis. But again, the systems that we use for this purpose are owned by OASO, and therefore, we all follow a uniform system.
So are security contracts that are held to provide security services in the facilities, are those staff trained in privacy?
Yeah, I think it's part of their trainings.
Part of the reason why I ask on it,
Yes.
to be honest and pointed, is that what we have heard quite a lot is people being threatened. That if they put forward grievances in facilities or are not happy, that staff are threatening them and their status. And so I would really like to understand what the training is, and also separately and apart, what is the process to receive grievances of those sorts?
So if you're hearing anything from clients in care, please share specifics of that so we can actually look into it, because those are obviously very, very concerning.
Yeah.
We, have protections in place, but honestly, what you're hearing from the ground would be very concerning to us, so we want to make sure that we can look into it on a site-by-site basis.
Is there a place where folks in facility would know where to put a grievance? Are there notices, posted in accessible languages?
So I think on the HERC side, there's an email address that people can use. You can also go to the shelter staff. I defer to DHS on their process for grievances, but that's the process.
The answer is yes. At all our DHS shelters, we have a process where clients can put in grievances. Also, they could call 311, and those grievances get routed to our ombudsman unit that we have as an agency, and then it's routed out to the program staff that oversees the particular shelter, and then we work with responding and following up and investigating each case.
And I guess for Dr. Long, it looks like you want to respond, but could you just for the record, for those who are listening and would like to understand what that process is, if they don't know what that email is, where can folks offer grievances about what they're experiencing in facility?
So we instruct and offer to our guests that they can share grievances with our staff members that are on site. We have both behavioral health staff members, if that's who you'd feel more comfortable talking to, or administrative staff members. And if that's not happening or people don't feel comfortable, hearing specifics would be very helpful, and we'd very much welcome that.
Where could a person, if they do not feel comfortable with addressing staff on site, where could a person do that in an anonymous and safe way?
So if they don't feel comfortable talking to our administrative staff, they can talk to our behavioral health staff that they may have more of a relationship with. They can also, like we said, we've set up different ways like email addresses, or I'll have to double check, but I believe 311 would get back to us as well. We can confirm that.
Okay, please get back to us on where the emails are, because it is very often that folks don't feel comfortable with talking to anyone on site with fear of retribution, whether it's founded or not. It's kind of a natural human concern. But for the record, we would like to have some clear process protocols for folks that we can get out there.
I was just going to add, and I'll have to confirm, but I'm almost positive that DOI has a posting at every site as well with contact information, because they flag for us if they inspect and it's missing. So I can confirm, but I'm almost positive that that's another avenue for folks.
Great. And have you all received complaints through those portals? And what's kind of the scale and scope of that?
So we don't talk about individual cases, but we have received we've received things from DOI, we've received things from our general email inbox, and we take things very seriously, and we look into all concerns when they're brought to us.
On potentially changing gears a little bit, but on the in the same vein as offering feedback like grievances. For food in particular, we know that a lot of people have had feedback for us. So what we've done at my sites is we've set up QR codes that we put on the wall, and they're clearly labeled in different languages, that you can take your phone, of which most people have, Wi-Fi is enabled at all of our sites, and click the QR code to offer us specific feedback on the food. That's how we've removed certain meals and added more that people are voting on.
Thank you. Councilmember Brewer?
Just on an overall comment, so if you have, what you said, 57,000, something like that, in care now, how many jobs are going begging in the city of New York or even the state of New York? Do you have any sense of that?
How many jobs
Yeah.
are? So, we're working with DOL to refer people to jobs. We don't necessarily know if they take the jobs.
Okay.
But yeah.
I'm making a point. People are moving to Minnesota,
Yes.
Texas,
Yes.
et cetera. We know that. So I want to keep them here. There's a lot of talent. So I guess I'm sort of like saying, how are we doing that? It is not the philosophy necessarily of all New Yorkers who want to do that, but I certainly do. I know you do. So that could be a different way of looking. Get them out, but get them to New York State. I don't even want to get them out. I want to keep them in New York City. I don't hear you saying that. So I know that may not be your philosophy, but it's mine. And I just think we should think that way a little bit differently.
Well, and I think that we've been doing that in pockets, and we have like a real relationship with Department of Labor. So they've been doing some of the screenings as well to connect people to the industries upstate where people are hiring. I think a big impediment to all of this is housing, always in every community.
Minnesota, they're giving them houses.
I know. Well, and that's the thing is we see a lot of people going to Minnesota, to Texas, because there's cheaper housing, or there's actually housing being given by big corporations. So we've been trying to find those jewels in the rough
Okay.
who will help us with that.
All right, but I mean, with all due respect, I know how much work you're doing, but it should be larger, sane. We are trying to find homes for people in the state of New York. That's not big, bold letters. I'm just saying. Okay, so I would like to hear that more. Now, schools. I'm totally focused on the schools. For school year 23 and 24 and 24-25, of the students in Herx with children of the families who were forced to leave their shelter placement after 60 days, what percentage of students and how many were placed in the same borough? Do you have those numbers?
I don't have the same borough numbers.
What do you have?
I have there was 7,600 students staying in a Herc shelter from July 23rd, 2024, who would have been impacted by the 60-day notices.
Okay.
And this is, public data, but of the 7,600 students, 41.9% were still enrolled in the same school and housing location.
Okay.
31% were enrolled in the same school and moved housing location, and 14.8% were discharged from New York City public schools. 7% had moved their shelter location and transferred schools, and 4.5% had transferred schools but not sheltered.
So like, say, 42% would be still in the same school. That would be your best number, right? 41%.
Not necessarily. It'd be a mix of 41% and 31%.
Right. Okay. And you said the same school district. What was the 31%?
Was enrolled in the same school and moved housing location. So they could have moved to a shelter down the block.
Okay. All right. The issue is, if I assume, because you have fewer numbers, you're going to be closing some H&H shelters. I don't know, but I assume. So my question would be, can you keep those students in the same school? Nothing matters more than to be in the same school. Nothing. And I really would like to see the Head Start and earlier kids also kept in the same school. Then we have we have all these families staying in the state of New York because they'll be integrated into our great school system. We have to be thinking that way. I don't want them to go to Minnesota and Texas. I want them to stay here because you put money into them in many different ways we have, and I think that they will be great New Yorkers. But if you keep moving them around to the schools and the shelters, I don't think that's going to help. We don't have that many people left, really. It's not a huge number. So the question is, can we eliminate, are you thinking about eliminating this 30-60 day and keeping them in the state of New York? How is that thinking possible given what you're dealing with? Is it possible to think that way?
So we continue to make changes as this response has required us to. Just yesterday, we announced a shift in our 60-day noticing policy. So we continue to make changes, and we'll continue to announce them as they happen. It is also our intention to help people integrate either in New York City, New York State, or anywhere that they think is the best place for them and their family.
Well, they're going to go wherever they can get a job and a house. So if they can get it upstate or the city of New York, I mean, we just have to focus more. I know you're focusing, but upstate you can focus more.
And one thing I just want to say is that we've been working a lot with the state on the Migrant Relocation Assistance Program, where people are getting housing upstate. I think we've had more than 500 households move into housing upstate.
Okay, well, probably got more in Minnesota, I'm just saying. Okay, now absenteeism is the other big issue. One of the papers the other day had the huge absenteeism in shelters, obviously including, I assume, DHS, H&H, and everybody else. Big number. But if you have to go with your parents to all these different meetings, then you're going to be absent. Somebody early testified. What is the story with taking your children every which way when you are moving? Can we eliminate that? Because you're going to be absent.
So, I mean, I think that we're not requiring people to bring their kids at this time.
But they're bringing them. They just testified, and I hear that also. They just testified to that effect. They said they needed to bring them.
I understand, but we're saying that kids don't have to attend, so we're happy to continue making that message known.
Why do you think it's not getting across?
I think people...
Because the panel earlier didn't get across.
I understand, and I think that we'll just continue to make that message known.
Do you keep track of the absenteeism of the young people in H&H or any other shelter system who are migrants?
So I would have to defer to DOE, but they do have students in temporary housing officers that do help.
I know what
Yes.
I understand what they got. What they got and what's happening are two different things.
Fair enough.
Okay. And the other thing is, we're one city, one administration. These kids some are going to leave, right? It's devastating the schools. It is devastating the schools, where you had unbelievably great families coming from the migrant community, populating where people had left during the COVID. So we're one administration. Are we thinking about what we can do to keep those kids? Maybe it's getting rid of the shelter 60-day, because then they'll stay in that school.
Well, we
got to think about the Department of Education too, not just your silo.
No, and I appreciate that, and we work really closely with the Department of Education to make sure that there's not really intense unintended consequences. I will say that, at this point, at the numbers I read before, 72% were still in their same school. So they might have moved their shelter for a variety of reasons. Some of it has to do with the 60-day notices. Some people moved out completely from the shelter system, came back, and then were put in whatever shelter we had available at the time, and still their kids stayed in the same school. Yep. And also the other point that I would make clear here is that as 70% of people have moved on from our shelter system, and there's lots and lots of people who move on from the traditional shelter system. This has traditionally been an issue with the Department of Education, and we are hyper-focused on making sure we coordinate and that we make it as easy as possible for kids.
Okay, I mean, just as we speak, parents, parent coordinators, schools are all panicked, just to be honest with you, about the fewer number of students in their schools. It's bad for the American children who develop friends. It's bad for the migrants. It's bad for our city. It's just bad all around. We should be stopping any unenrollment by these migrant families. It's just everything we can do. With all due respect, maybe it's not your job, but it is this administration's job to do that. We're not doing it because they're leaving. No, they just take off one day. We need to, because they're not feeling that there's enough support for them here. It's not just casework. It's saying we are going to find other ways to keep you here. It's a big administration. I'm just saying, with all due respect, it's not that kind of arc, in my opinion. Finally, we've got holidays coming up. How do we had them before, but how do we deal with families during the holidays and no school?
So, I mean, one thing that we do is we often have a network of nonprofits that come in. I know that's not your question, but I'm just like.
No, it's fine. I want to know what.
There's for
I'm trying to keep these families here.
No, I know. So we try to have nonprofits that come in. We'll do Thanksgiving meals. They'll do gift giveaways. We are working with New York City Service to make sure that we're getting gifts to all the kids to really make them feel welcome in this country. And so that's something we're really focused on. Okay.
I'm going to end because I know time is up, but I'm just saying I want to hear from this administration. We want to keep these families here. We don't want them to go to Texas and Minnesota. We have jobs here. These families take over, ain't nobody going to be working in the city of New York. So I want to hear that more. And I want to hear that the schools, they don't talk up either. Everybody's scared to talk up. They don't talk up either about the need to have these families stay here. Those schools deserve unbelievable credit. You deserve some, they deserve more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Joseph.
Thank you. The questioning will be along the same lines. Earlier, when a parent testified, when you move a child and that child has bus service, it takes about 2 weeks for that child to receive, and this is regular. I just had a hearing on it. How long does it take when you move a child for them to get bus service to their new school or to travel from their new location?
So I have to defer to the Office of Pupil Transportation on that.
So you guys don't work in collaboration with them? You move them, but yet you don't talk to OPT?
So we talk every day to the Department of Education, and we are working through all those issues. But if you're asking about the specific timing, I have to defer to the Office of Pupil Transportation.
How many students stayed in the same borough when they were moved?
So I don't have that data with me today. We're happy to follow up.
Chair? Thank you. So that means that so you did not come with those answers as you were coming here today? You know, these questions would be asked because all of this is tied up. It's not in a vacuum or in a silo. This is all connected. Shelter, children, schools, attendance, And as you can see, and I'm sure you heard yesterday, you saw the report that came out, 146,000 of our students live in temporary housing. And the outcomes for them are not that great, so that's why we want to make sure they have what they need. So all of these things are tied up, so when you come before us, I expect those answers when I ask those questions. Dr. Long, I know you're always eager to answer.
I'm holding back.
Tell me, talk to me. Talk to me about New York City kids in your care, and what are we doing when we move them around the city, and this council has been asking for us to keep them in place, right? Go ahead.
The first thing you could see me really wanting to say is I agree with everything you just said. I would say as a primary care doctor that the most important thing we're doing for the mental health of kids is school, not me.
That's right.
And so just a couple of things. At our humanitarian centers, we have DOE on site at all of my sites.
I know, I visited.
Yeah. But that's been really important, though, because that's how, if a family does move on to the site, we try to enroll them in school, as you know, within 24 hours. And if we don't hear from them, if their child's not enrolled, we knock on their door literally with DOE to make sure that we're moving as fast as we can. Another just data point, and this isn't exactly what you were saying, but it's at least the way I operationally think about it, is last week, or the week of the 5th. It's last week? Yes. No, 2 weeks ago. Thank you. This is how we looked at it. So of all the families with kids that came back to the arrival center, my site, that had one child in grades K to 6, we placed 90% of them in the same borough. 8% on top of that, we had a discussion with them, and they selected to, and we documented their reason for selection, to go to a different borough. And a common reason for that is, as you might guess, if one of the parents got a job in a different borough, that might be a reason for them to want to have their kids continue school where they're then working. So 90% plus 8%. We've been trying to get those numbers as close to 100% each week as we can. That's certainly not always been the case.
So what's the percentage now?
That's from last week.
That's from last week, okay.
Yeah, or the week of the 5th, I'm under oath, which was apparently 2 weeks ago.
So what's the difference in, what's the attendance like? You do knock on doors, yes, we appreciate that, but how many of our students are really getting out the door? They're not missing schools, because the absenteeism rate, if you look at it for overall New York City, is very high. And that include our New York City students who are living in temporary housings.
So I would have to defer to DOE about their approach to absenteeism. What I will say is that my site leads, site administrators all know who the DOE representatives, as you saw yourself, are, and we work together, and they're the ones that identify students that are having absenteeism issues, and we work together to see what's going on and how we can help. And
all of your sites have shelter-based coordinators?
I believe so, but let me double check to make sure that I'm not said. There might be one that doesn't, but not as far as I know, but I'll get back to you on that.
And your older students that come in your care, what services and support do you provide for them? For your high schoolers, your students who should be somehow in transfer school, are you referring them to D79 schools? Talk me through the process, please.
So at this point, if we have the 18 to 22-year-olds, we talked about it a little bit, but we have a connection with DOE to make sure that the ones that are going to DYCD and the ones that are in our care, we're connecting to schools if there's eligible placements, and we've been working on that. We're also, and that's been a big part of just the process as people come back through our care. We've been trying to do those referrals. I think education of all kinds is top priority, so I think that that's been a really good connection that we've made.
Education and immigration. And as you're moving folks along, how are they getting their mail? Someone said they missed a fingerprinting appointment because their mail was sent to them delayed. As we delayed, those folks get put on lists to be removed.
Yeah, and I think what I talked about a little bit is we've done a lot of improvements in mail over the last year. We've really focused on it. So one of the big changes that we made a couple of months ago is that we made all sites keep important mail indefinitely, so that as things come, if people leave the shelter, they can come back and request that mail. We've also done a lot of work with case managers to make sure that they're helping with any mail issues. We've also made sure that all of the sites are focusing on mail and know what type of mail to look out for. And then most recently, yesterday, we announced that in a couple of weeks, we're going to be doing a centralized mail room for non-DHS mail. So all of this has been a work in progress, but we continue to...
As they move around, are you forwarding mail? Since since you already know in the system as to where they're being placed? Are you forwarding the mail to their next address or no?
No, because 70% of the system has already left. So as people move on, we're just keeping their important mail in the place that they put as their address so that it's easier for them to get to.
And do they get a phone calls to know that how do you notify them that the mail is there?
So we started a pilot on that, and we're making tech changes to make that easier because part of the issue was a tech issue. But at this point, we'll be able to do that through our centralized mail system.
Wow. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to go back to childcare issues, and in particular, obviously, folks who are utilizing programs like Promise NYC vouchers are exempt from this policy. Can you walk us through the impacts of exempting those families that are attempting to use vouchers for childcare who are getting bounced around the city in the system?
So we really do try to keep people as close as possible to their current shelter when they reapply. And we're going to continue doing that regardless of this policy shift, and we continue to make changes to our policies.
Are you keeping track of those families that you are noticing to evict from facility who are using Promise NYC vouchers for childcare?
We've been working with Promise NYC to get more people connected to the services, and case managers obviously are working with each family that we have, but not on a central level.
Okay, but there is, hi, but there is awareness, perfect timing. Babies are amazing. There is awareness that folks will suffer the same challenges, right, of like stabilization and some kind of care, just a different age group, and moving around a city. There's still that same problem. I just want to be sure that you are keeping track, if we are helping to facilitate people to use these services and then evicting them somewhere far, like it undermines everything we're doing. So I just want to understand, how are you making sure that you are not undermining your own work?
No, and I appreciate the question. As I mentioned, it's still our intention to try to get everyone as close as possible to their original shelter, but I think the bigger point here is that we're trying to help everyone move on from temporary shelter. No one wants to raise their kid in a temporary shelter, and so it is the work of case management to get people as many resources as possible so that they can move on, and part of that is our legal services, part of that is connecting people to childcare, and part of that is making sure that people are saving money, people are kind of making a plan for them and their families to move on.
So I guess in terms of the case management, which we've talked a lot about, you mentioned saving money. Is that part of case management? Are there financial? Can you tell me like what actually case management looks like? Because I will say we hear the administration say intensive case management all the time. And there was an example in the pre-panel of someone whose case management actually resulted in work. So not all bad. Nevertheless, we do hear a lot of stories that the intensive case management is an exit interview. That's not intensive case management. That's pushing people like, you gotta go in 2 weeks. What is your plan? So walk us through what this intensive case management is supposed to be.
So, I mean, I'll turn it over to Dr. Ted in a second, but I think that overall the importance and the point of the case management in our system is to help every single person make a plan for what are they going to do in the next 30 and 60 days that's going to help them resettle out of shelter. So that means, how are they going to get farther along in their work permit and their legal process? How can we get them appointments to do that? How can we make sure that they're looking at ways to get work? Most people are working, but how are we helping facilitate that? If we have referrals to OSHA trainings, if we have referral and ESOL classes, how are we connecting people to that? But
So are you keeping any particular data on, I know Dr. Long, you mentioned 700,000 case management hours. I don't know what that means, but like, are you, because the quantity is less important than the quality, right? If we have an immigration system that takes 4 years to actually get through step one, I don't care that we did 70,000 applications if we only have one person that actually can get through that system. So really what I'm hoping to understand is how is the quality and real outcomes that we are pursuing actually reflected in the context of a city where we haven't been able to get folks to move on from our shelter system. Generally, we have the highest number of children, which council member mentioned, which has been persistent for the past 9 years. So I guess if I could just understand more quantitatively, not quantitatively, qualitatively, what that truly does look like, that would be helpful.
Yeah, happy to. And I know Councilmember Joseph just stepped away, but my excellent team has given me precise answers to her questions, so maybe I'll just put it on the record.
Sure.
Yes to coordinators at all of our sites from DOE. And we also get emails from attendance teachers daily so that we can stay coordinated closely with our DOE colleagues that are on site at my sites. So going to case management.
Can I pause you for a quick second? Is that the case for DHS sites? Are there coordinators at every site?
We work closely with DOE, and they are, and our percentage for last month was 82.6, where we make sure that our families are placed and the child and the youngest child in the borough of where they go to school.
Great.
And that's always been a policy for us, so we just continued.
Thank you.
Okay.
Back to you.
Thank you. So if I may, just to make sure I'm being precise, qualitatively more about what case management is, and then what do we have in our data, what have we learned through these meetings, as also a way to inform qualitatively how it works. Sound good? Okay. I would say we take the same initial question that I ask all of my patients that I've ever seen in my Bronx primary care practice for the last 7 years. It starts with, how can I help you today? So whatever people's individual barriers are, and I'll give several examples here, the case manager's goal is to identify what those barriers are and figure out what help you need. The number one thing that people want, which is something we've talked a lot about during this hearing, is to get a job. Everybody wants to get a job as a way to have them and their families be able to pursue the American dream. But everybody needs something different to get that job that they want. So sticking on legal services, if you tell us that you need work authorization but you applied for asylum, you don't know how the process works, we can educate you and make the right referrals. If you're eligible for applying for work authorization, we can make you an appointment at the AAHC. And again, now we're actually even helping you to apply for work authorization from the arrival center the minute you arrive with our case management team. So our case management team does a lot of different things. If you've applied for work authorization and you have it, and we have, again, data on that because we ask you for updates related to that, then we look at what kind of job you might want to have and what your experience has been. So I could tell you, for example, sort of interesting, how many former doctors we have in our asylum seeking system and how many we've ever had enter into our city asylum seeker response. I can tell you how many nurses, how many pharmacists, how many lawyers. That's important, though, because those are the types of jobs people would want to continue to pursue. So another example is we had an event where we helped people at one of our sites to apply to work with a community-based organization that I mentioned earlier that teaches how to work in a kitchen, cooking skills, things like that. So we reached out to people based on their prior experience, based on their work authorization, and then they dressed up for the interviews, came in. It was a really nice day of people applying for their first job in the U.S. We actually got to see it because we did it on site. So case management lets us sort of have that individualized approach, but legal services is one important thing. Last thing I'll say about the legal side of things is with our community advisory board, which has been, again, instrumental in terms of how to get case management right, we have a specific work group on legal services. So how we're asking the questions, the types of things we're covering, the types of services we're offering to people. It's not only informed by the experience we have on the ground working with people, but it's been informed by our community leaders that also have the ear to the ground. And to your earlier point, maybe hearing something slightly different than we hear. So we want to hear it from every source, and we want to be able to collaboratively come up with solutions together. Jobs is another thing, housing is another thing. You mentioned saving money. That's actually something that's come up that we're now helping people with. Was that something on day one that we knew we needed to help people with? No. But it's something we've heard from people, especially our guests, for example, upstate, that are looking for apartments. They may have been working for a while in the communities that they're in. A lot of them are telling us their barrier to being able to get that apartment they want and to be able to exit the system is they need to know how they can save money in the U.S. to be able to afford that apartment. So we work with them on how that works, and we make a plan with them. Other types of things the case management can cover is we can help you with how to navigate getting the apartment, both either in New York City, in New York State, or in other places. So we do have connections to jobs and housing resources in other places too. And we really base that on the job. So if somebody has experience working in a job in a certain sector, as Councilmember Brewer said, we'd love to keep you in New York City, but if you'd prefer to go to a different place based on the job that's available, we can educate you about that and we can make a plan with you. So it's really all about you and whatever your barriers are. Our job is to move heaven and earth to get you where you want to go.
So are you keeping track of outcomes around that? How many people have actually gotten a job, or how many people have actually gotten permanent housing? How many people, all those dimensions?
Yeah, so one way to look at the dimension related specifically to jobs, again, is we do know if you've not applied for work authorization, you are eligible and have or have not applied, or we ask you, which is, again, what you tell us, if you've received approval for work authorization. We then work with you to get a job, and we document in the records that we have, this is your prior job experience, here's the types of things we talk to you about. Maybe if you were a cook, we're going to put you into that program I mentioned, or have you applied to that program I mentioned. Maybe if you're a nurse, we can arrange, which we're working on now, have you go through the appropriate process to become a nurse here in the U.S. or to do something else in the medical field. We desperately need more clinicians and people in the medical field to care for New Yorkers and, frankly, everywhere across the U.S. So we're trying to, again, meet people where they are based on their former experience, which we note in the records we have.
So are you keeping any data?
Yes.
On the outcomes? Can you report to the council what some of these outcomes are? Because it's still very descriptive and lacking in outcome data.
Yes, I think it would be great if we could circle back with the exact data that we have. And if we don't have the data that you think would be important for us to collect, we're totally open to adding a question onto the surveys we use for people every other week.
Thank you. Okay. In terms of extenuating circumstance, what training is staff being given around extenuating circumstances review?
That's a really excellent question. Extenuating circumstances was the result of a policy set by the city as part of the terms of the Callahan stipulation. And therefore, the policy itself and the questions that are asked when we interview guests around the extenuating circumstances are very proscribed. So we have a slide deck, and we sit down and we train the staff to go through the questions. They also go through the questions using our system host, and they are programmed into that along with the script and the interpreter sitting with the guest.
But in our noticing, we start the process of letting people know what the process is to get another extenuating circumstance, so case managers are aware of the process, and any questions that come up, they know how to answer them.
How much I think where we all find enormous challenges is in the level of discretion and interpretation, right, around guidance. Are you finding staff needing substantial guidance on how they're making determinations?
No, the staff who do the interviews shadow existing staff. We've now been doing this for a number of months, so we have grown some in-house expertise around this. And they are supervised by a group of staff. So the people making the ultimate decision are not the people doing the actual interview, and therefore there is an added layer of review on site before a decision is rendered.
And is there an ability to appeal?
Yes.
This decision? Can you walk us through what that is like?
3 ways to appeal. There is an email address that is both on the determination letter at the end of an extenuating circumstance review. Also, advocates and others can contact us on behalf of clients, which they do frequently. Also, clients may individually speak to staff on site to express concern and to have the determination explained to them.
What was the second option? Advocates
can contact us directly on behalf of their client.
And are you keeping any data around appeals? How many appeals are coming from advocates? How many are coming from clients?
Yes, we have that data.
What the
and we can follow
results
up
are?
with you.
Can you report around what the status of appeals are and what are provided and denied?
We can provide that information to you. I don't have it with me, but what I can tell you is that in terms of formal appeals, as outlined in the stipulation, I do not believe we have received any. Most of them have been inquiries about status that we have answered with information and updates. And all guests are encouraged to consider if with additional documentation. One thing that happens is that guests may affirm that they have taken steps toward independence without any documentation to indicate that is the case. And so often guests will come back to the site and have a second EC interview with that documentation. They are informed they can do that at the site.
And in terms of are those documents provided in preferred language?
The documents that the guests provide to us can be provided in multiple languages, and the documents that we provide to the guests, which I assume you are asking,
yes,
they are provided in the guest's preferred language. They are also interpreted for them on site by an in-person interpreter in their preferred language.
So every document, or is that upon request? Because we know there's some, in some instances literacy issues.
So again, at the extenuating circumstance interview, we provide a determination letter, and that determination letter is read to the guest in their preferred language by an interpreter.
Got it.
As well as being provided in writing.
Got it. Thank you. Could you share a list of all the languages in which the shelter limit notices are being published?
Are you, the notices that are given out to the families and individuals while they're in shelters, what you're asking?
Yes.
I think we have, I don't know if you have all the languages,
Yes.
but,
Oh.
go ahead.
No, I have the languages folks speak, but it's all of the languages that people have asked. I don't have the exact list with me, but give me a minute and I'll get it.
I'm sorry, Molly, could you say that one more time?
Yeah, so I don't have the exact list of languages right here with me, but I can follow
provide
up
it
with
to the
it. Yeah,
council.
that's pretty, we have that.
Can the admin supply the council with a slide deck that is being offered to staff around the extenuating circumstances that you referenced?
The training materials?
Correct.
The training materials, I'll confer with council and yes.
Great. The coalition has informed us that no one responds to the email address unless an advocate sends an email. And I assume it's the email address on the extenuating circumstance notice. Who's manning the email address on those notices?
So it's the New York City Emergency Management and our staff from the Reticketing Center, and I respectfully would disagree with that with that statement and would ask that if Coalition has concerns about our lack of response to please let us know indications and evidence of that.
Are you keeping data on your responses?
We are.
And can you provide to the council what that looks like? How
I don't have it with me
the
today.
frequency of response in cases?
Sure.
Okay. And in terms of, are people given reasons for their denials if they're denied extenuating circumstance?
There is a determination letter that is given to the guests that outlines the decision that was made.
And what are some of the decision trends that you see, or maybe some of the most common around denials?
The request for an extension of stay and shelter is tied to steps taken by the applicant toward independence from the shelter system. None of our goals is, and I don't think it's the goal of our guests either, to remain in shelter indefinitely. So one of the things we are evaluating are steps the individual has taken toward independence. So, for example, applying for an IDNYC, enrolling in English classes, looking for a job, enrolling in a course like the workforce development course the person who testified earlier mentioned. Those are all steps towards independence that are granted consideration in an extenuating circumstance evaluation.
And so how is that assessed, or is there like a point system with those steps? How is that assessed on what's more valuable than others?
So each of, we've spent a lot of time litigating this with legal aid and with advocates. So we've gotten approval on this process. The point of this is a individual determination of someone's steps taken to independence, and we continue running that process as such.
I'm sorry, so individual determination, I don't know what to make of that. Does that mean it's up to the individual who's reviewing
There's a rubric.
that person?
Yes, that's exactly right. And that was a key part of the settlement and a key part of our negotiations with legal aid.
So if I'm having a really grumpy day and I want to not be the most generous interpreter of people's steps, I could deny them. And that would be fine based on a rubric. So I guess what maybe I'm not understanding is, it sounds like there's a lot of discretion on interpretation on whether ESL classes versus being able to access an IDNYC.
So we monitor both, but the point of this is to have an individualized review of each individual that comes in front of us. But we do that in as fair a way as we possibly can with staff, which gets down to training, which gets down to talking through what kinds of things would showcase that somebody did something and ensures that they have brought proof to showcase that. So it is not about the grumpy interpreter, the grumpy case reviewer, but it really is about the individual in front of them and what they're saying.
Yeah, there's 100%, each case is very unique, but I think absent a clear rubric, a standard, you can have an infinite number of interpretations around what is more valuable than the next, and that feels utterly problematic.
So we have a standard and a rubric, which we have negotiated heavily with legal aid, and so that's what I'm gonna keep saying here, that we have a process, but it is also really focused on the individualized review of the case in front of us.
Got it. Thank you for that. Let's see. Do you have any?
And I have the list of languages that we have these notices: Arabic, Bangla, Chinese traditional, Chinese simplified, Dari, English, French, Fula, Fulani, Pular, Georgian, Haitian Creole, Korean, Maninka, Polish, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, Turkish, Ukrainian, Urdu, Uzbek, and Wolof.
Okay, we're coming up on time, but I just realized, in terms of healthcare, does the city make any exceptions to the 30/60 limit for individuals that have upcoming medical procedures?
So that is part of the process of requesting an extenuating circumstance. We also have a reasonable accommodation process where if somebody has some reason where they would need to stay in place, they can come and request that.
And how long does that take to determine?
It depends based on if somebody brings proof, and we review each case individually.
And how many of these do you keep track of how many have been requested, reasonable accommodations?
So we'd have to get back to you on that point. I don't have the exact reasonable accommodation numbers in front of me.
Are there any medical procedures that wouldn't be included in exemptions or accommodations?
So it's a case-by-case determination based on the totality of circumstances.
And I guess this is another, a lot of gray areas, and I appreciate the complexity of it. But is that just dependent on the person who's reviewing it, whether they think this is an important procedure or not?
There's lots of lawyers involved. There's a medical there's clinicians involved. There's a process